The Mustang. Strength, freedom, resilience. It represents everything about the American dream and power. It's the spirit of the West and the muse for today's project. That being said, friends, our base was a Five Below Breyer model named Cashew, and we're gonna bring some spirit to him. Let's get started with this tutorial. As we may or may not know, the DreamWorks Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron is a Mustang, and I do want to include some of the more dynamic characteristics of a Mustang in this realistic portrait portrayal, so I did list 4 traits that I find to be most common collective for Mustangs. Let's get into it. This is a major glow up with minor resculpt, so I do have a list of supplies here in a second that you're going to see. I want to make sure that you have a metal flat piece, particularly soda aluminum tends to be the best to sculpt with, and I also have a recipe for some sculpting mix if you want to use that. And then I have a further list of supplies. Now that we have that, let's start to actually sculpt. So taking my flat bits of soda can, I then traced on all the pieces of mane and kind of free-handed those, cut them down with scissors, and then sanded it using a piece of sandpaper. After I had everything kind of textured, I took a not even pea drop sized ball of clay, but I have an up close tutorial. 5, 4, 3, 2, go. I can't stand not having a close-up shot because I want to show you what I'm doing. So we already have our 2 strips laid down. My hand has clay all over it. So we're going to take another little bit of our clay mixture, place this on the palm of your hand and make a ball. Keep in mind, because this is fresh mixed, this might be a little runny. If it needs to firm up, you can give it about 5-6 minutes in the air and then check back on it. Now I can make my rope, and I'm going to use even pressure with 1 or 2 fingers and start to make a rope. At this point, I think this one is long enough to split in half, so I'm just going to take aside our extra piece of clay, and for now we'll just continue to roll this one. Once you think it's an adequate length for your strip of metal, take a little bit of the Bisquick textured Mod Podge clay water mix and put that at the bottom of your strand. That's going to be your adhesive agent. And then, as carefully as you can, take your metal piece and gently lay your clay onto the surface. Try to line it up best you can, but if you don't have super dainty hands, I like to use a paintbrush, and I'll tap it into place. And then you can just kind of push it gently, line it up, and tap it in. And you can flip it around, arrange it however you need to. And then tap this down. And now, if you can see it, we have all 3 strands here. And we still need a couple at the very bottom of this piece. So what we're going to do is break off a little bit from that other leftover rope and make some tiny strands and do the same thing. So now I have this super tiny strand. I'm going to take a little bit of that Mod Podge clay mix, stimp it into the back here, taking that metal base that we used from a beer can. I'm going to press this down, seal it in. And you can let this overlap if you want, or go in any direction. If you have a reference for your specific mane or tail, absolutely use it. Now is the time, you know? And if not, go with the flow of the hair and the tilt of the metal. That being said, this part has all of the clay adhered. We now get to go through the fun process of carving our texture. And I like to use a nail tool. This one has a pretty blunt edge, and we are gonna follow the initial lines and indentions, and you can also use a little bit of water. And I'm taking this, dipping it in our water, and then wiping the remnant on my thumb. And you're gonna use that to carve more in-depth detail. Another tip I'll give you is you don't want your lines to be too straight. And I'm gonna put you on the above camera so you can see it better. This is our initial line, if you can see it. I'll do another one here for you. So just dip my brush in. And I'm doing very light pressure and just kind of flecking it out. Back to the time lapse where we continue. Fold that into a rope of clay, lay that onto my metal bit, flatten that down with a paintbrush, and then lay continual rows of clay down. Once all of your clay is then laid down, I like to take my small paintbrush, smooth those bits out, and then take my nail dotting tool and do some finer line details. And I'm doing that into each fragment of metal to create little bits of hair and kind of add some motion to them as well. Making sure to end the bits of clay with almost a curl to it, kind of giving it more of a feral, kind of wild look. Collectively, we made about 19 total separate mane and tail fragments for this sculpture. And before we attach any of these, I went ahead and cut off the rubber mane and tail with some scissors. It was actually pretty easy to do. And then I super glued and used baking soda to adhere the mane and tail and sprayed it with some Krylon khaki as the base shade to work with. The base of the tail is literally just crumpled up aluminum foil with a little bit of an air dry clay coat on top, and now I'm going to attach our metal bits using our super glue, and I use baking soda as a kind of like super quick cure sprinkle on top of the super glue to allow it to just adhere faster. That being said, I am now going to glue all 10 pieces to the tail, kind of rotating the sculpture about. As we do so, laying our angles correctly and kind of mapping it out while I can in this process. Also, I will say I made a super sticky, awful mess with the super glue, so please make sure to put the cap on and off as you need it, because girl, let me tell you. With our beautiful mane and tail now attached, it is finally time to do our spirit face up and turn this boy into a spirit stallion. That being said, it's time to get into that ooey gooey honey gold buckskin base coat. I found two very lovely examples of some done horses to use for this project, so keeping those references on my phone and off to the side, I kind of tried to color match to my best ability using a mixture of yellow ochre, raw umber, and burnt sienna tones to start the ombre on the legs, as well as give some shading to the muscles. So that's what we're going to go ahead with starting, is on our evened out yellow ochre golden base coat. So I'm taking a huge fluffy eyeshadow brush and I'm running our base shade all over our model here, doing several coats. It took us about 4 coats, and in between every layer of our base and doing those tiny little circles to blend the pigment into the body of our sculpt, we also set spray those layers with Krylon matte setting spray, and I use that to really not just grab the previous layer but hold on to the next layer of base color that we're going to be using. Now that the base is nice and solid, we're going to go ahead and start to kind of tight line, add some shading into our muscling points. So going in with a slightly darker, more concentrated raw umber mix into our base shade, I'm going to take a even smaller eyeshadow brush and really fixate into those grooves into the muscles, taking tight line little circle motions into those areas and producing more shadow. I'm also going into areas on the stomach as well and darkening that area. A lot of people might not know this, but horses aren't entirely covered in fur. They do have points where you can see the skin, so the nose, the tips of the ears towards the stomach area, and the inner thighs is going to have a bit more skin exposed, and we want to have those areas be a little bit darker with blushing. Going in with our seal points, we've used the most we can with our pastels, so I'm going to go in with eyeshadow now and use our super dark concentrated raw umbers and blacks and start to take more circular motions, focusing in on the ears, the muzzle, and the legs, as well as those belly points, and just getting really into those deepest, darkest crevices of the muscle very lightly with these super dark colors, but really focusing in on the legs and the muzzle. Now that I'm satisfied with the subtleties of our shading for our horse, I decided to do an update. We also started to do the eyeshadow across the spine for the dun pattern, and continuing that, we're going to start to add deeper, darker tones to the legs, the muzzle, the eye sockets, the tips of the ears, and the tummy, progressively getting into a very deep, dark brown shade towards the just top of the hoof. But we're going to start to progressively build our ombre, starting with raw umber and progressively getting darker until we're at the jet black point, where we'll then go in with our acrylic paint and start to fine line detail with our dark black lines for the nostrils, the mouth. And we're going to start painting the mane using a base of raw umber by Galleria acrylic line in Winsor & Newton. I probably completely botched that, but this is my go-to raw umber shade. So getting back into the mane and tail, I want to say it took us about 3 or so layers of just using the raw umber shade, and then I went in and did a dry pass through with black acrylic on a dry brush and just allowed that dark pigment to really pick up on those raised areas of the mane to kind of further accentuate and add volume. But this part did take a little bit, and it was only because the paint needed to dry, no other reason. So this is the shortest part of the face up for our spirit model. I want to say this took us a total of maybe 3 layers and 3 hours to do. Also telling you this because I almost forgot, please make sure to paint the undersides of your mane and tail, because y'all, I almost forgot. And it really almost sank the project just having straight white underneath the mane. So, please make sure that every part of your horse has paint, I guess. You know what I mean. Getting back to it. After many paint strokes and layers and waiting, we now are pretty satisfied with our mane and general look of spirit, so I decided at this point to update my little sister. That being said, we did need to add some modifications. Jessica wanted her Mustang to have a backstory, have some scars and give him a story, so we decided to do some scaration near the eyes. That being said, I looked at a lot of different examples of scar tissue on horses to see how that skin would heal over time, and I started to implement little bits of gray and maroon around the eye, making it just so almost like maybe a scrap with a mountain lion happened or something. And then I added a little bit of gloss to clean it up a bit. Getting into the hooves, I wanted to make sure I had anatomical correctness, so I did use some diagram photos of a horse hoof, so I could better accentuate the frog, which is that little V mark inside of the hoof there, and add some highlights. I was about to celebrate a job well done when I realized something's still kind of missing for our spirit model. I wanted this to connect a little more, so I took that logo from the movie and I decided to paint it onto his hip, almost like a brand mark on both sides, and now I feel like this is a beautifully done homage to Spirit, the Stallion of the Cimarron. Thank you so much for liking, following, and continuing to watch my tutorials, you guys. It's been so much fun working on this project. If you want to see what I have going on Twitch, be sure to check that out where I work on our projects live. And I will see you very soon. Thank you, friends. Don't forget to stop by. Bye!